Hello, everyone. This is Marita, one who catches lightning, with the Path of Ish podcast, Walking with Our Shadow, where we share ancient indigenous teachings of remembrance, all so we can walk and learn how to walk a path of radical self-love. Hello, everyone. It's one who catches lightning, with the Path of Ish, here to have another conversation with you. So let us approach the circle that holds this conversation. And the guardians of all my people, as well as everyone's ancestors and heritage that are here listening. And so we approach the directions to hold this as we approach the east, the south, the west, and the north. And as we come back to the east, we know we can begin again. And it is with this promise of beginning again that it gives us hope. So let's enter this circle with that feeling of hope. But I want to also stay really curious about this idea of beginning again. And the reason that I want to stay curious is that I feel that when we live in societies that are colonized societies, that are societies that have been created really through religion, or have used religion as their ways of creating value and devaluing the native societies and practices of the time, that when they say begin again, it is a very colonizer perspective. The idea of just having your sins taken away, and then you go back to your week, and then you just go to your confessional and go back to doing the same thing. And that, for me, is a very curious cycle of beginning again. And so we can see that this idea in society is this idea of I can do whatever I want as long as I confess it, and then I'm saved, and then I either continue doing the same thing and get saved over and over, or I then create a value system that takes me further and further and further away from a sense of community with everything that is natural. Now, this is a really important part of this conversation that is just kind of coming in. This is my fourth time trying to record this. My cats have been crazy. So I've had to begin again a lot. But the conversation that I want to have with you today, and one of the titles that finally came through in one of my recordings, is the mythology of climate collapse, the mythology of beginning again. And the reason that I want to talk about it in terms of mythology is that much of the Western world does not have connection to mythology. And I see it in my students. I was having a conversation with one of my teachers today, and we discussed this, that in Indigenous teachings and many First Nation teachings, that the lesson is in the story and in the telling of the story. Yet I have many students and many people that come to me that I'm realizing even more and more that this is very foreign to them. And one might say that as society has, quote unquote, become more civilized, it's become more fragmented. And this fragmentation, this specialization, doesn't allow for interconnectedness of human beings with themselves, of human beings with others, and more importantly, human beings with the environment around them. In part because there has been a creation and a separation of humans being better than nature. So when we face conversations such as climate collapse, there are many people who do not care. There are many people that in their storytelling of that they heard in their indoctrination, in their programming, who believe themselves to be outside of nature are blind to what is happening in nature, are blind even to just simple things that everything has a life and death cycle, including this planet. What I find fascinating is within that, there's also this disempowering of humans. This disempowering that, of course, we could not affect anything. We are not making things worse. So not only are you separating the human from nature, you are to tell them that they are better, but saying that they truly can't actually affect anything. We could possibly explore again the connection of that in a loss of the interconnected and the lessons that are found in the storytelling of the old myths and legends and gods. And the reason that I approach this is that if you come from mythology and storytelling, your relationship to the lesson and to the characters in that story is far different than if you come from a being separate from mythology. Yet the Western world tells stories, and one of the main stories they have been fascinated with is the demise of this planet. Some of the best-selling movies and series do not take place on this planet. They take place in space. Now, of course, coming from critical theory in film, which I came from film studies, among many other things, one could say, yes, we try to talk about the present and we put it in the past and the future so it doesn't agitate people, so we can talk about it more easily. But the problem is, I believe, that when you are trying to have a conversation of climate collapse, because we have been fed this idea that science is going to save us or that we will escape this planet and have to, it's just kind of inevitable that people sometimes are like, well, it's not going to be me. Climate's going to, die in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. Well, that's not me. And I find it curious that when we are facing a climate collapse, there is this movement within the United States to not allow women their rights, their reproductive rights. So I've had this conversation with scientists, philosophers, native elders, other medicine people, ecologists, economists of different scales. And one of the things I've started to tell them is, well, of course, this is happening. We've been programmed for years and years and years about the ending of humanity and the need to find or explore other lands. Whether you watch Star Trek or Gattaca or any series of that, or even series right now that are new or that talk about literally how this planet, how we know it now, will not exist much longer. We've been telling that story over and over and over, as if programming humans to be disconnected to their possible acceptance and accountability to change their way of living and not believe themselves to be greater than the other beings on this planet. Now, we know that if humanity ceases to exist, the earth will be fine. And we've talked about in many times how we're not really trying to save the earth. Many people are just trying to save their way of life. I want to live this way. And much of that has been programmed about what you should expect of your life, including ease. Things should be easy. I should be able to manifest that. I should be able to have that. Why do I have to work for that? Why does there have to be discomfort? And this is not a conversation of back in the day, when I had to walk to school in the rain and the mud and the sleet and the snow backwards with, it's not that conversation. It's the conversation that we do not know how to remember, the stories that connect us to the possibility that we are creatures on this planet. And mythology does that. In mythology, humans and gods shapeshift, they fall in love, they change. The realm of magical and ordinary walk hand in hand. And the imagery of mythology connects you and connects humans to their creatureness and their animism. It connects us to the minerals inside of us. It connects us and reminds us of how the trees have forever been our homes. Yet there's this need to make a human more than. All beings are created in the image and expression of the all. But yet humans lost their connection to divinity. Through the separation of their mind and their body and their essence, throughout time, throughout culture. And they lost the mythology. the people, original people of these lands in the Americas have their own mythology, and what was taken away was their shape-shifting divine creatureness in the crushing of that, of their advanced cosmology, their advanced medicine. And what I find fascinating is that they were called animals or less than, but yet these animals had much more complicated, advanced systems of building, of societies, of sustainability, of regenerative farming. It was just the way they did things because they lived in a relationship, of cosmology, of architecture. These quote unquote animals, heathens, were more advanced than the white settlers that came here. Maybe if we could connect to our creatureness again, we could quote unquote advance our civilization back to where it was, back to the most perfect calendar, the Mayan calendar and cosmology, incorporating the number 0, which truly didn't exist before. The Greeks had tried it, other people had tried it, but it was really the Maya who understood mathematical 0, and they understood it through nature. They came up with the idea when they saw rain being puddled on the earth and then it disappearing. Or so that it was the story told to me. The importance of mythology is not just to connect us back to our creatureness, but to connect us back to the imagery which presents for itself, in and of itself, a connection to others that is non-human. And in that connection, then there's communication. And it's two-way communication, not just the human imposing upon the plant kingdom or the animal kingdom or the mineral kingdom. But humans are too busy being trained to conquer things, to decimate planets, all for advancement. How many stories did you grow up idealizing that literally had the end of this climate and this earth as part of it? Part of the start of it. How many series have you watched for 7, 11, 12 seasons that in it they're searching for a new earth or a new planet or a new way to settle? How many blockbusters have we paid millions and billions to see the ending of humanity? The end of civilization as we know it, and we watch it with horror and fascination, and at the same time being like, that will never happen in my time. That's not real. That's just fiction. But if the Western world was connected to mythology, it would have a different living breathing imagery that they would learn the lesson in the story. Humans have been trying, some of them, for a very long time to distance themselves from nature. How curious, isn't it? That we or this society has forgotten the lesson in the telling of a story. But it has become just entertainment. And we need to be entertained with bigger and bigger things. The appetite is not satisfied. We have to see more violence, more gruesome things, bigger explosions, more death, more impossible situations, so that we can go through all of the emotions that we do not even know exist in a day, in just an hour, or maybe even 2, and have something resolved for us. Tied up with "they lived happily ever after," or the end. I think people these days watch movies and read stories just for the ending. And I've talked to people, when people who've picked up books, or they just forward to the end just to see what happens, so that then they go back and watch it. It's as if they have to know how it's going to end to see if they want to engage in it. Yet I feel that with mythology, there's never an end to it. There's just a pause between the telling of the story from one person to another as it gets spread out to down to family members and to generations. The story grows. It's not kept inside of a book. It's not kept on a screen, but it is in the living, breathing entity and is held by the imagery of all beings. We're all beings, plant, mineral, animal, human. An animal should just be part of human, but I'll separate it for everyone who believes it's separate. But in reality, we're plant, animal, and mineral. All are equal. All have the power of imagery and the telling of the story. And it is their weaving of their perspective of the story that keeps things alive and teaches us about an interdependence and connection between all living things. Yet I find more and more and more that people just want lists and tasks and exercises and don't have time for the telling of the story that is the lesson. The telling of the story that can include their confusion. Not to conquer it, but to stay curious. And why does that story matter, Marita? They ask. Well, let me tell it again, I say. And let me use different imagery. But sometimes it doesn't matter how much imagery you have been able to learn and to hold by having deep relationship. The chasm between Western civilization and those savages, that savage part of themselves, that animal part of themselves, is so broken that they can't see the magic in the mundane. And so even though you've given them and showed them where the well is full of water, they don't see the water and are always thirsty and dissatisfied. And they go from teacher to teacher to teacher to teacher because no one told them that they are made of water. Or if they were told, they don't believe it, or they just think of it as a fact. They don't see the interconnectedness that the ocean inside of them is to remind them of an environment of possibility. I'm teaching a class right now, building sacred relationships. And it was a class that my students asked for, even though they'd been with me for a few years. And they said, Marita, this is where I really see this gap for new people coming in. So we've created this class. We're having a lot of fun. And the people that don't understand how important these classes are as a basis to truly get into the quote unquote, as they say, higher levels of knowledge, are not willing to start creating the bridge that building sacred relationships creates. It is the widest bridge back to your creatureness. For it allows the space and time just to ask questions from other beings about their perspective, their life cycle, and their lessons. And how would they, as an individual or as part of their community, how would they solve problems that we have or that they face? And this is the basis of mythology, the lack of separation between all beings. Where all beings are represented in the stories of gods and thunder and lightning and snakes with quetzal feathers and humans made out of corn and the ant people who took in humans during one of the floods and one of the creations or the four creations before this being said to not be successful. But even in the mythology of the creation of the fourth and fifth worlds, where humans are destroyed, when these stories are told, those who know mythology know the lesson. And understand that they are writing and responsible for writing the next chapter of the myth. In the circles where I teach and where I have learned, myth is real and palpable. It is not fiction. I've even had some of my teachers say, you learn the old ways. In the old ways, let me tell you a story then. Because when they sometimes just try to give me information, I just kind of look at them and they, yes, that's right. You learn in the old ways. You learn better this way. Let me tell you a story. We had a beautiful class the other day in our first class that is still open for people to join, in Awakening the Sacred Heart with Quetzalcoatl. And I will pause here and thank Grandmother Lani-san Moonwalker for awakening the heart as part of it. Part of the title or the imagery that holds this cacao and cosmology class. And in that class, and the class before it on building sacred relationships, I told stories after story after story of many different people in relationship to corn, in relationship to cacao. And when we went to approach the feathered serpent, we approached the imagery, not just of the Maya, the Zapotec, the Aztec, the Toltec, of all the peoples in Mesoamerica, but also asked the question, where in your culture does this creator being look like, sound like, and where is the mythology in the stories of them? And we heard stories of a serpent with a rooster head, or of dragons in Asia, or the serpents who were really people, or what were called the people of the British Isles that the Roman Catholics wanted to stamp out. We remembered in the telling of the story of how we had been afraid to remember the stories. How we were told that the stories weren't real and that they were evil and dark and we shouldn't listen to them, and old wives' tales. And the more that people told the stories of their people and their creator being of Quetzal, rainbow, feather, dragon, the people in that circle from all around the world looked at each other on that Zoom, and for the first time believed in their creatureness and the possibility of mythology to hold the medicine for today. I want to do a 2-part meditation today. In the first part, I want it to be a time when you question. So it would be a great time to, if you journal, kind of come back and journal with these questions possibly. Or just to play lightly with them and ask yourself throughout the next week, the next month, the next year. So let us begin the first part of the questions. And let us stay curious as we take our 3 breaths and bring in the intelligence of our body, the intelligence of our mind, the intelligence of our essence to participate in this. And the first question is, have you ever grown a plant, a tree, a grass from seed? If you have never planted anything yourself, do you at least know the life cycle of germination, the life cycle of plants, trees, and grasses growing? In that, do you know then the environment best suited for different plants, trees, or grasses? And if you've never planted or been curious about this, why have you not planted or gardened or farmed or collected or harvested? Who is the person in your family that has the green thumb? Who in your family told you to stay indoors, to not get dirty? Who was the last person in your family to farm as their livelihood? When was the first time that you watched a futuristic movie that involved the end of the Earth planet? How many end of civilization or Earth stories have you read or watched? Why does the Earth or civilization as we know it reach their end in these stories? Is it aliens? Is it volcanoes? Is it rising seas? Is it meteors? Is it the complete devastation of life? What were the lessons that these stories taught you, programmed into you about your relationship to Earth? about your relationship and the skills needed to survive. How many times in these futuristic movies do people actually eat real food? And as we continue in the second part, what is your relationship to myth and mythology? What do you know of the stories of your people? Who were the characters in the stories that have stayed with you the longest? How many times in these stories is real food, be it animal, mineral, or plant, eaten? How many times is there real fire in these stories? How many of these stories take place in nature? Who weaves and keeps these stories alive? And as these time of contemplating and asking questions comes to a close, I want to add the imagery of a tomato plant. Tomato, for some reason, has been a plant that I've worked with since very early on. The first thing I ever planted was corn. Corn and tomatoes, I believe. My mom planted the tomatoes, I planted corn. I loved my row of corn. I was so proud of it. But tomatoes seem to have an imagery that is worldwide, that many people relate to. So then my question to you was, when's the last time did you grow tomatoes or buy heirloom tomatoes? Or how many stories of the future have in it a tomato as a plant and as a food, and the only real food? The imagery of tomato, which is a fruit, round and red, just like the core of this earth, filled with seeds and sweetness, and the core memory of humans, connects us back to a conversation of how we are creatures and how we can co-create and take responsibility for how we tend the garden of our mind, the garden of our body, and the garden of our essence. With that, let us take our 3 breaths in and out through the nose. Giving thanks to all of the beings here, this first breath, the intelligence of our essence for being here. In and out through the nose, thanking the intelligence of our body for being here. In and out through the nose, thanking the intelligence of our mind for being here. And my homework for you is to go plant and grow a tomato plant. And let the grace of this lesson and interaction remind us of where we all came from, the earth, the continent, now called Africa. And tomatoes can grow wild, and so maybe they will inspire your wild creature nature to be remembered, not just as information, but as living, breathing mythology. Shade. Once again, it is with deepest gratitude that I bow to you for joining me on this podcast, this episode, this circle, this plática, this meditation, this remembering. I hope that you have stayed curious. I hope to see you in the circle again next week. So make sure that you like or follow. Until then, may you be blessed with abundance of peace and radical self-love.